Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Build WhatsApp Web with Appwrite and Vue.js. In this one, we're going to be creating the basic sidebar interface for WhatsApp Web, as well as the chat creation steps. So, create a new group, add the members, and create the group. Alright, so let's jump right into it. So just to show you what it looks like, we're going to be designing or creating basically the infrastructure for building out this sidebar component, as well as the functionality that happens when you click on this plus. I'm going to be copying it from WhatsApp Web, the actual WhatsApp Web that's on the side of the screen. That's on the other screen. I'm not going to be putting it on the main screen because I have personal chats over there, but you can just open up WhatsApp Web on your own screen. In any case, let's jump right into it. So let's pick up where we left off. We had our application after we created the functionality for logging in and registering. So let's jump straight into the code. So here we are in application.vue, and the first thing we're going to want to do is just create the container. So this is going to be main, and we're going to make it a full width, full height, flex container. All right. So on the left side, we're going to basically have our sidebar here. And on the right side, we're going to have the main content. Right, in this one, we're going to specifically focus on the sidebar. So let's open up our components folder and create a new folder called sidebar, since this is going to have multiple components. And let's just create the main sidebar.vue file. This is not going to be a very complex file, just because there are multiple different components that can be within a sidebar. So we're just going to make this a sort of thin wrapper component around the sidebar. So let's say template. We're going to have a main, and the main will have a class of width. Let's make this 350 pixels. Usually it's bad practice to hard code tailwind values, but in this case it's fine. Let's make this full height, a white background. Let's give it a right border and make that border gray 200. Let's make it a flex container, and it will be a flex column container. And inside here, all we're going to have is a slot. And if you're not familiar, essentially a slot is just a way of a Vue way of basically saying any content I put inside the sidebar component from the outside when I have two sidebar tags, so just stick it over here. Let's just say script setup lang equals ts. All right, now let's import that from our application page, script setup lang ts, and sidebar. Well, I don't want that there, so I'm just going to say over here, sidebar. Sidebar. There we go. And when I said, remember the slot over here, so basically the slot is going to basically have any content that's there. All right, cool. So let's actually verify that that's working. So let's put ASDS as a little test, and we see here we now have a sidebar along with ASDS, and that's obviously not what we want at this point. So let's move on to the next step. Cool, so the first thing that we're going to want is the contacts sidebar, let's call it. The contact sidebar is essentially just this view where we have all our contacts. It will have a little profile image. We'll have the different buttons over here and the search. So let's start on that. So contacts sidebar, let's make a new component inside our sidebar folder, when we'll call that the contacts sidebar.vue. And essentially this will have the components within. So let's say template, and this, so the first thing we have is a header. The header will have a class of width full, gray 100, let's say a height of 16, flex items center, justified between, and padding on the x-axis of 2. Now, if we look back at the design over here, we'll see that we need the avatar component, and this is a component that actually repeats itself at the top over here, and then on all these contacts. So let's build that into a generic component, and let's call that component an avatar. So avatar.view. And for now, we're just going to implement the standard icon if there's no profile picture sometimes on WhatsApp, so there isn't a profile picture, and it'll show like this generic person icon, and we'll do that as opposed to implementing the images just yet, but we will get there. So first thing we need to do is create our template. Inside our template, we're going to have our main as usual, and we're going to have a class where we have the width of 10, the height of 10, rounded full, which will make it a complete circle, flex, items center, justify center. We're going to want a gray background 200, border gray 300, just to make the border a bit darker, and we'll make the overflow property hidden. All right, very nice. And now we need to just put in the user icon inside of it. The library I like using is by the creators of Tailwind CSS. So if I go to install hero icons view, I think it's default to view 3, so here we go, hero icons view. Let's just open that up, and in the meantime, we could also open this one up. Hero icons view. So let's actually go to the GitHub where it shows in a little bit more detail how to use it. So we have npm install hero icons view. So let's just do that. Create a new terminal and hero icons view. And just to show you why I like it so much. First of all, because it has view components, but the second is that there's just a lot of really good looking components. So if we look over here for user. So we have here, this is what we're going to want. We're going to want a solid one though, so we'll just take that one in. All right, now that that's finished installing, we're just going to, all we have to do really is just say import user icon from @hero icons view 24 solid. And that should just work. There we go, perfect. So we have the user icon, and we're just going to put that inside our main. Oop. User icon, close that out. And this will have a class of width 10, height 10, text white, relative, and a top of 2. This is just to push it down a little bit, and we'll see what that looks like in a second. So if we go back to our context sidebar and just stick in the avatar here, avatar. I'm just going to need to create the script setup over here. Setup blank equals TS. All right, and if I put in my avatar component and import that, so we'll get to see what that looks like. So if I open up our page here and refresh. Okay, so that's obvious why that didn't work, is because I still have the ASDS. I don't want that. I want my contacts sidebar here, and let's import that. Again, I'm doing that control space to trigger the auto import, and that only works because I have the Volar extension. Definitely want to install that if you're working with Vue. I'm sure I mentioned that in the first lecture, but just to reiterate, now we have the contact sidebar, and here we can see that we now have this little profile picture, which looks pretty good in my opinion, and that will match that. Now the second thing we need are the 3 action buttons over here. So that one's a WhatsApp status, which is just a message that appears for 24 hours to all your contacts. To certain contacts, we have the plus to create a new group. This actually looks a bit different on the WhatsApp app. I'm just going to use a plus since it looks better in my opinion. And then we have the 3 dots for more options. You can try this out on your own WhatsApp web application just to see what each one does. So let's get started on creating those buttons. So we need to go to the contacts sidebar, and here we have our header. So let's create another section which just wraps those buttons, and this will have a class of flex items center. Let's put a bit of spacing in between each of them. Space x4, which basically just puts space on the x-axis between each item, and then text gray 500 just to make them gray. And now we're going to want the status icon. I'll just use, instead of this icon over here, I'm just going to use a clock icon because that signifies an amount of time. And since statuses are only available for 24 hours, I think that makes sense. So let's just do clock icon, and we can automatically autofill that, or auto import that rather. We're going to want the plus icon, and we're going to want the ellipsis horizontal icon without the circle. Ellipsis, just the ellipsis horizontal icon. All right. Now that we have those things, let's just use them. So we're going to have our clock icon, which will have a class of width 6, height 6, and then cursor pointer. We're going to want our plus icon to have the same dimensions, class. I'll just copy that over. And then the last thing we're going to have is the ellipsis vertical icon. Sorry, the ellipsis horizontal icon. So let's just copy that over. In fact, let's just copy over this whole component and just paste in the ellipsis horizontal icon. All right, so let's see what that looks like. And here we have, looks pretty good in my opinion. So we have the clock, the plus, and the options. It looks good enough for now, at least. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is create the input to search or start a new chat. So we're just going to use our generic input component that we created for the login. And we just need to put that in its own section after the header. So we have a section, and this will contain the input component that we've created, which will import. It has a type of text. It has a type of text, placeholder of search or start new chat, I think was the terminology, search or start new chat. And this section also needs a bit of styling, so let's have a class where we have padding x 2, a padding y of 2. In fact, we could just make that a padding of 2. Border bottom gray, and 300. That should just give it a little bit of spacing, and that looks good enough for now. All right, the next thing we need to do is trigger the functionality when I click on the plus icon, so it should open up the first screen for creating a group. So let's actually just do that right now. So we're gonna need a few things beforehand. So if we think about it like this, in order to create a new group, there are a few steps. There's a step for adding contacts. There's a meaning to your group. There's a step for naming the group. There's a whole bunch of different steps that we need. And we're gonna need a way to manage each state. So I need to know when I want to show, let's say, for example, the group info when I put in the group name, or I need to know when I'm going to be adding members. In order to do that, we're going to use a library called PANA, which is essentially the default, it's the recommended state management library for Vue 3. So let's just get that set up. So if I look, install PANA, and all we're going to do is npm install PANA. I think that's how you pronounce it in any case. PANA. Wonder if it says how you use it. It doesn't say. All right, PANA it is then. All right. And all we really need to do is it's essentially just a Vue plugin. So we're just going to do create PANA and then use that plugin. So let's just do that. If we go to our main.ts, we can see that we created a router and then we use that router down here. So we're just going to do the same exact thing. Const PANA is equal to create PANA, and then we're just going to use that PANA, and just like that we have state management. Alright, so in order to do this, we're going to need to create a store. A store is essentially a place where we store data that PANA will manage for us. If you think about a component, if you look at the login component, so we have state here, email, password, which is reactive, meaning it's bound to this input. So we're going to do the same thing, but with more of a global state. It's basically state that is higher up in the state tree than just an individual component, since we want to dictate which view should be shown in the sidebar. Should we show the contact sidebar? Should we show the new chat group sidebar? So we're just going to do that. So what we're going to do is create a new folder in our source directory, a new folder, and call it stores. And the first store we're going to make is global store. And the way, well, there's a convention to define a store. So you say use global store, which is essentially saying I want to use the global store, and we define the store equals, I think it's define store. Yeah, it's define store. Let's just do export const use global store, define store. Well, that didn't show up in the auto import, so we're just going to say define store from PANA. Okay, define store, and then you need to give it a identifier, so we're just going to call this global. And then you need to give it the state. So we have state, which is a arrow function, which just returns an object. And this object is basically our global state. So what do we actually need over here in our global state? So let's define an interface, which is our state. And we're going to say this, we're going to return as state so that it's type safe. And essentially all we really need here is which sidebar view do I want to show. So sidebar view, and this is going to be one of a few different options. So we're going to make a enum for that and say export enum sidebar view. And we're going to have the contacts view, which is essentially the view that you see most of the time, where you can pick a contact or pick a group to continue chatting with. We're going to have a new chat. We're going to have new group participants, which is when you add the participants to a group. We need a comma there. And then we're going to have the new group info, which is essentially when we're going to add the profile picture of the group or the name of the group, new group info. Awesome. And then sidebar view is essentially one of these potential states. The default state, if we say sidebar view, is going to be the sidebar view.context. And that's our default state. Okay, and one more thing we're going to need here is actions. And actions is just a way of defining a bunch of methods or a bunch of functions we can use to change this state. So all we really want to do is show sidebar view. It will accept a view, which is going to be one of the options. And all we're going to say is this.sidebar view equals view. And that way, if we want to show the new group participants view, we'll just call global store, show sidebar view, and pass through the relevant sidebar view, and we should be good to go. So the first thing that we need to do is, first of all, is if we go back to our application, we see that it's not actually set up to use the global store, meaning it will always show the contacts sidebar. So what we actually need to do, first of all, is hook this up to our global store. So all we're going to do here is essentially say const global store is equal to use global store. and we're going to say the sidebar view is equal to the computed value of global store dot sidebar view. And there are multiple ways we could have tackled this. This is just in my, we could have said over here, well, let me first show you what I'm going to do. So we say v if sidebar view is equal to sidebar view dot contacts. And that way this will only show if the sidebar view is the context sidebar. We could have done global store dot sidebar view, but I prefer not to have the term global store in my template. So it's much cleaner in my opinion to look at it like this. And the way we can verify that that's working is if we go to our if I go to our page, we see the contacts. But if we go to the global store and change the default to, let's say, new group info, we should no longer see that, and you can see that it's gone. It looks like the HMR failed, so let me just rerun npm run dev. Sometimes that happens. If you see that when you save, the changes no longer reflect in the browser, just rerun npm run dev. I think this is a good place to stop for this section. We have the global store set up, just because this is getting on 20 minutes. I should be uploading another one very soon, which will just basically finish the create group flow. And I'll see you in the next video.